Before the winds of change swept through the valley, Veloria existed under the absolute hegemony of High Chancellor Valerius. The infrastructure was rigid, designed to prioritize the security of the regime over the well-being of the populace. Every citizen's action was logged, and every word was weighed against the scales of loyalty. For 3 decades, the state maintained a facade of perfect order, while the underlying social fabric began to fray from years of economic stagnation and systemic suppression. In the subterranean levels of the capital, a different narrative was being written. Lyra, a former university professor turned dissident, began organizing a clandestine network of thinkers and laborers. She understood that a revolution required more than just anger. It required a blueprint for what would follow the collapse. In the flickering light of illegal printing presses, she drafted the Manifesto of Shared Sovereignty, a document that would soon become the spark for the coming conflagration. The movement gained its intellectual weight through the contributions of Soren, a government archivist who had spent years documenting the regime's failures from the inside. Soren and Lyra met in the shadows of the Great Library, exchanging encrypted data and historical precedents for democratic transition. Their partnership bridged the gap between the disgruntled working class and the disillusioned intelligentsia, creating a unified front that the Chancellor's secret police had failed to anticipate. As the whispers of dissent grew into a roar, Valerius tightened his grip. The Emergency Restoration Act was implemented, suspending all remaining civil liberties. He retreated further into his fortress, relying on a dwindling circle of loyalists who provided him with filtered intelligence. The disconnect between the palace and the streets was absolute. Valerius viewed the growing protests not as a legitimate grievance of the people, but as a mechanical error in his grand design that needed to be purged. The revolution did not begin with a bang, but with a walkout. On the morning of the winter solstice, the city's power plants and transit lines went silent. Lyra stood at the head of a massive column of citizens, marching toward the administrative district. She carried no weapons, only a banner inscribed with the names of those the regime had disappeared. The sheer scale of the nonviolent mobilization paralyzed the security forces, who found themselves unwilling to fire upon their own neighbors. The transition of power occurred in a tense, 4-hour window. Soren, utilizing his high-level security clearance, entered the inner sanctum to present Valerius with the terms of surrender. The documentary evidence of the regime's financial insolvency and the military's refusal to engage left the Chancellor with no tactical options. It was a clinical end to a brutal era, documented by Soren as the final entry in the old regime's archives. The immediate aftermath of the revolution was a period of productive chaos. With the old structures dismantled, the citizens of Veloria faced the daunting task of self-governance. Soren walked through the streets, now filled with the sound of open debate rather than the silence of fear. While the lack of centralized authority led to temporary shortages and confusion, there was a palpable sense of agency that had been absent for a generation. Lyra was appointed as the head of the Transitional Council. Her first act was not one of retribution, but of transparency. She organized public forums where the crimes of the past were aired and the goals for the future were debated. The documentary records show that this was the most volatile period of the revolution, as the coalition of rebels began to splinter into various political factions, each with a different vision for the new Veloria. 2 years after the fall of Valerius, the first democratic elections were held. Lyra and Soren worked together to codify the new constitution, ensuring that power would never again be concentrated in the hands of a single individual. The document they produced emphasized checks, balances, and the fundamental right to information. They signed the document in the same library where they had once met in secret, marking the official end of the revolutionary period. Today, Veloria serves as a case study in systemic transformation. The transition was not perfect, and the scars of the old regime remain visible in the city's architecture and the collective